Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series on wisdom, and particularly transitioned over to wisdom in business. And what we're talking about, we talked previously about wise business people, because that's the most fundamental need of any business. But today we're going to talk about acquiring wealth wisely, because it takes wisdom. When you're acquiring wealth, you have to be wise about how you do it. There's a wrong way and a right way. There's a way that gives you good results and makes your life better, and there's a way that gives bad results and can make your life miserable. So we're gonna look at what the Word of God today says about this, because about about when we're acquiring wealth, how to acquire it wisely, what to do and what not to do. And we're going to begin here in Proverbs 10 on verses 2 through 3. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he cast away the substance of the wicked. So that's our first thing we want to do. Is in the end, if you gain treasures by wicked means, it's going to profit you nothing. It will not deliver you from death. It cannot save you in the day of calamity. However, the Lord will protect those who do what's right in his eyes. That's what righteous means. They will be delivered, and he'll preserve them, make sure they have food, clothing, and shelter, and everything else they need for his purposes. But the wicked, he's going to cast them. They're going to lose all that stuff. He's going to take it from them, and they're going to lose it. He's going to destroy it or give it to somebody else or something. So when you're acquiring wealth, do not do it by wickedness, because in the end, it will not turn out well for you. Now, continuing on in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 22, we read the following. The blessing of the Lord, it makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. Now, this is what you want. You want to acquire wealth by him blessing you. And you don't need to be asking him to bless what you're doing. You need to do what he's blessing. And he will make you wealth, and he'll make you rich. And it won't come with a bunch of trouble and a bunch of sorrow, like when people get wealth by wicked means. It'll be a blessing from beginning to end. So this is what you want. This is important for you to do. That's the right way. We looked at the wrong way. Now we look at the right way. And now we're going to talk, and we're going to look about why are people trying to get wealth in the first place. In Ecclesiastes 10, verse 19 tells us, a feast is made for laughter and wine makes merry, but money answers all things. Okay, the fact is, if you want to laugh, have a feast. Well, get married, have wine, because it tends to impairs people's judgment somewhat, and they may say or do goofy things they otherwise wouldn't do or whatever. But money answers all things, and that verse all by itself can lead to a lot of problems. It makes people think that Solomon's saying money is the be all end all. It doesn't solve every problem, but it does solve a lot of problems. And we'll talk about those in more detail. So it's good to have money because it will solve some problems. And we'll talk about what it will and will not solve later. But just know it does. It's always good. It's always good to have, as long as it doesn't have you. Now, we continue on with the words of Shlomo, King King, as I say, Solomon, in Proverbs 10, verse 15. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Okay, so a rich man's wealth is, I mean, it is a security, a strong city. If a man's rich enough, and say his house burns down, and he has enough wealth, he just build a new house. But the poor are destroyed by their poverty. And in some places, like give you an example, in Africa, there's places where there's no clean water, and people are, and because of their poverty, and people are trying to help them drill wells and get clean water in various ways, but they cannot do this for themselves because of their poverty, and their poverty is literally destroying them. Their children are drinking out of dirty ditches, water. Sometimes animals have pooped in and whatever, because they will die without water, but they get all kinds of diseases, and many of them die from drinking the water. But money, but the reason why they keep doing this is they don't have the money, the means to get a well, because maybe they can't hand dig one. The water's too far down, but it's down there. You drill down far enough, you're always going to find water. Unless you run into oil or something, and then they won't have a poverty problem anyways. But generally speaking, you drill down far enough, you're going to hit water. It's just a question of how far you have to go down. But it takes money to do that. So their poverty is destroying them. And it's true in other people's cases too. They can't get medical help they need because they don't have the money. People in COVID in India died simply because over there, if you don't have the money for a doctor, they just don't treat you. You need an antibiotic, they'll save your life, and you don't have it, they don't give it to you. You just die. So poverty is the destruction of the poor. So you don't want to be poor. Rich is better. Or rich is better if you go about it the right way. We'll stress that again. And here's another reason why rich is better than poor. Proverbs 18, verse 23. The poor use entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. The poor is always in to plead with someone to get something. But the rich can answer roughly to them or anyone else, because if you're wealthy enough, you don't need anyone to give you anything. So you don't try to plead with someone to give you someone. And the rich, there's always a lot more rich people. I mean, poor people than rich people, and the rich can just answer roughly, because what's the poor going to do to them? So they have that luxury of answering roughly. But the poor, if he answers roughly, to give him help from somebody, he's probably not going to get the help. So again, having wealth is better than not having it, as long as you have wealth and wealth doesn't have you. Now, we're going to continue on in Proverbs 22, verse 7. And we're going to see another example of this. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender. And this is 100% true. The rich rule over the poor. The rich employ the poor often. Then the poor have to do what they say, because the rich are the ones who own the factory or whatever, and the poor guys are working in it. The borrower, and the borrower has to pay back the lender. Now, an example, maybe even the best case example, is Jacob with his two wives, and then later he wanted to get his own livestock from Laban, and he made an agreement with him, and he owed it, and he got I can it'd be another study, but when I do the patriarchs, perhaps we'll look at this. We can show that he actually got his wives right away, but he agreed to work 7 years for each one, and 6 years so he could have his own flocks. In all that time, and he got the flock, he started getting his flocks right away also that were his own. But he had to pay back Laban, and he was a servant to him and worked night and day. And that's actually a better arrangement than a lot of people have. Because a lot of people have is they borrow money, say, on a credit card, and they don't have any agreement with who they borrow the money from for what they'll do to repay the loan. Now it's up to them to go find a means of employment to pay back the loan. And when they and the lender, hard times come along, you're out of a job, maybe they'll defer your payment, but they're still collecting interest on you. And someone can take a loan when say to go in college, and be paying that thing off the rest of their life, and they don't even have a set conditions where they can be certain it's going to be paid off by a certain point, like Jacob did. But the whole time you pay them off, you are their servant. You may not be directly working for them like Jacob did with Laban or Laban, but a percentage of your money all the time is going to them, and you can't afford to quit working because you took out this loan. And you're their servant, like it or not. Your time is not free. You're not free to just do anything you want, because you must work a certain amount of time to get enough money to take care of your needs and have enough money left over to service that debt. So, but more important than that, remember. But the righteous is who should. And when the wicked are ruling, we saw it's the people groan. It's better to be the lender than the borrower. It's better to be the rich than the poor. And so we want the righteous to be rich, those who are doing what's right in God's eyes. And God wants that also, by the way, because they're not going to oppress the poor. They're going to rule over them, without vigor, without oppressing them. And you don't want, and you want the righteous being the lender, so the wicked are their servants. Because if the wicked is the lender and the righteous are their servants, it's never good. To get wealth is in line with God's purposes. Again, as long as it's God's desire for you to have wealth, but not His desire for wealth to have you. And we'll explain that in more detail as we go along. Now, so we want to acquire wealth, we want to acquire it wisely. And Proverbs 15, verse 6, addresses this more. In the house of the righteous is much treasure, but the revenues of the wicked is trouble. Okay, so in the house of the righteous, if you do what's right in God's eye, and avoid loans you don't need, like we talked about, because a lot of times people get loans, and what are they really borrowing money for? They're not creating useful debt like Jacob did. Jacob, at the end of it, had something very useful. 2 wives and his own herds and flocks, right? Or and useful debt today might include getting an education, provided you get an education, it's something that's going to pay you enough to pay when you get out, to pay back off the loan, and then profit from the profit after that. Starting a business, perhaps, if you don't have the other way to do it, getting a house and maybe a car so you can drive to work. Those kind of things are useful debt. You still want to pay them off as quickly as possible. But a lot of people have useless debt. And useless debt it often boils down to this, as Dave Ramsey put it so well. Spending money you don't have to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. Well, the righteous aren't doing that, because those who are doing what's right in God's eyes aren't borrowing money for those things. They're avoiding debt as much as possible. And they're only going to do debt for useful debt if they have to borrow at all. Okay. So they've got much, so they're going to accumulate much treasure by doing what says is in God's eyes. But the wicked, they may accumulate treasures too by getting wicked wealth, as we saw earlier, but it comes with trouble. Their payback is trouble. Their payday is trouble. That trouble will come with them. That wealth comes with strings, if you will, so to speak. Comes with trouble. And we don't want wealth that comes with trouble. We don't want revenue. Think of a paycheck, comes week after week. You don't want a paycheck of trouble that comes to you week after week. Proverbs 15:16, we read the following. Better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. Okay, remember, the fear of the Lord is the cornerstone of wisdom. And you're better off with the fear of the Lord than to have great treasure and trouble. Because why are you having trouble? Because you don't live by the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord itself is great wisdom, and it's worth more than all the wealth of this world. Remember what Solomon said: wisdom is more valuable than rubies, emeralds, diamonds, gold, silver, what have you. But if you have great treasure and it comes with trouble, you're better off not having that treasure. You're better off having food, clothing, shelter, being content, because you're living in the fear of the Lord. So recognize the trap. If that great treasure is going to come with trouble, you don't want it. And it's certainly going to come with trouble if you're going to accumulate by doing something that God says is wicked. That's not right in the eyes of the Lord. And in Proverbs 16, verse 8, we read the following, and about the same thing. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. Again, you're better. You're better to be content with food, clothing, and shelter. And maybe that's all you have, but you're doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord. Then they have great revenues, all this revenue streams, right? People always talk about these revenue streams, right? Revenues coming in all the time in great amounts. You got all this money coming in all the time, but you're not right with the Father. Because as we saw before at the beginning, it's not going to turn out well for you. So we want to avoid, even if it means we can't even acquire any wealth to speak of, we're just gonna have food, clothing, and shelter. We're just gonna have the things we barely need and getting along. That's still preferable to getting the acquiring wealth through unrighteous means. That's how serious it is about not acquiring wealth by unrighteous means. We just do not want to do that. We don't want to go there. We want to avoid that by all means possible. Okay, now we're going to continue on here in Proverbs. In Proverbs 18, verse 11 through 12, we read the following. The rich man's wealth is a strong city, and high as a high wall in his own conceit. Before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. Yes, we talked about that's a strong wall to security, but that can be a problem all in itself. Now he's putting his confidence in that wealth. It creates pride in him. That is a high wall that's a barrier between him and other people. where he's too good, where he thinks he's too good for other people who aren't as wealthy as him. Because remember, he can answer roughly. He doesn't, he's the ruler, not the ruled, except. And this can make him haughty, but that is always, pride always will lead to destruction. So the wealth, someone might be like, well, why didn't God give me wealth? Because God knows how you are and it will destroy you. He doesn't want to have that. We're not always ready for wealth. And what gets us ready for wealth is humility. And there's countless examples in the Bible who I've talked about in history, or people sometimes say, well, they got a great wealth. They want to leave their one of their heirs. They said, but they don't know the value of a dollar. Well, I mean, they don't mean they don't know it's worth 100 pennies. What they mean is they don't understand the real value of it and what its purpose is and except, and how, and what it's good for and what it's not good for. And how do you get that is humility. Then the honor comes. And of course, the greatest example is Messiah himself. Did not have a place to lay his head, the Bible tells us, during his ministry. Humbled himself. The greatest humility of all, humbled himself on the cross. Then came the honor. Because he did that, he's been given a name above all other names. He humbled himself to the extreme and now is honored to the extreme. Because humility prepares people for handling wealth so it does not destroy them. And the honor that comes with wealth does not destroy them either. So if wait on the Lord. There may be some things in your life that need working out before if you're his, he's not going to hand you wealth if it's going to destroy you. You may need humbling first. Because wealth without humility will destroy you. Okay, in Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5, read the following. Labor not to be rich, cease from your own wisdom. Will you set your eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings, they fly away as an eagle towards heaven. Okay, labor not to be rich. Now, this is not an advocation for, this is not advocating laziness here. And of course, it's not saying don't work for wages at all. But if being rich is your goal, is your goal, it will consume your life. And you really can't get rich by laboring anyways. We've already talked about this some. About how the Lord raises up people, brings wealth. And we'll look at that a little bit more. But what you want to do is instead of trying to get wealthy, even the Lord may even give you success doing that for his own purposes. But what you don't want to be doing is trying to get wealth by relying on your own understanding, your own wisdom, and working. And just work and just think, if I work hard enough and I'm wise enough, it'll happen. Know what you want, because also you can spend your whole life doing that and you waste it. You can build up wealth and then you can end up like Marlin from the Marlin Mansion out here in Oklahoma. This guy started an oil company, worked hard, got his oil company going up well, built a mansion, sold some of his stock, got where he didn't have controlling interest anymore. In a hostile takeover, they basically kicked him out of his company he started. He lost all of his wealth, and ended up losing everything. living in one of the servant quarters that that he had made for one of his previous made for his servants at the end of his life. His wealth had wings and flew away. And people who are wealthy are always afraid they're going to lose it. Particularly when they got it by their own wisdom, because they often know that part of what they got was someone else made sometimes someone else made one mistake. I mean, like Bill Gates made DOS for IBM, and IBM made a terrible mistake in selling it to him for $50,000. And DOS is what led to Windows Accept. Well, Bill Gates could also make a mistake like that caused him, and perhaps not lose. IBM didn't lose all its wealth, but it certainly lost a lot of it, and it certainly have had trouble since then. But the riches do not stay forever. So don't be spending your life working for them. Don't cease from your own wisdom, and instead rely on the Lord. He'll give you wealth when he wants, if he wants, for whatever reason he wants, to fulfill his own purposes. You need to work hard, but not let work become your life. But that's exactly what will happen if you're just trying to work to get hard and rely on your own wisdom to get there. It will consume your life, and you do not want that. And Solomon talks about that in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 8. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, neither has child nor brother. Yet there is no end to all his labor, neither is his eye satisfied with the riches. Neither says he, for whom do I labor and breathe my soul of good? This is also vanity. Yea, it is a sore travail. Now, vanities kind of fell out of use in the English language. So when you say you could substitute in the word worthless, okay, probably a pretty close substitution or synonym. This is worthless, okay? It kind of reminds us of someone like Howard Hughes. I mean, didn't have any friends, nothing. You got rich people. They've labored. They just labor and they're never satisfied enough, and they always want a little bit more. But they end up with no one in their life. They don't have any people in their life. They're all alone. They've traded human companionship for wealth, and it's a terrible trade. It's worthless, and it's sore travail. I mean, it's like being afflicted with a horrendous sickness, okay? But that's exactly what can happen to you if you're laboring for wealth, to get rich, and not relying on the wisdom of God, but relying on your own wisdom to get there. So, even if you're not doing something wicked, you don't want to try to acquire wealth by you relying on your own wisdom, and I'm just going to work hard enough, and I'm going to push everything and everyone out of my way to get what I want, because you'll never be satisfied with the riches you get, because you need people, and no amount of money you get will substitute for that. It's like being thirsty, and your solution is to eat more salt. Okay. Don't let work become your life. Once again. Now, in Proverbs 19, verse 4, we read the following here about why is some of the attraction of wealth. We've already talked about some, and also because what I'm saying, don't labor. We're not saying you don't want any wealth at all, and it solves some problems, but also there's also some other good benefits to it. We're gonna look at those, and we're looking at how you're gonna strike that balance, because wealth can create relational problems, as we was talking about. We're going to look at how do we acquire wealth and not create relational problems, end up alone. In Proverbs 19, verse 4, read the following. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. Well, this is true. The problem for the rich man often is, what kind of friends are they really? The prodigal son, when he got his inheritance and ran out to a far country, had many friends as long as he had money to spend on them. But someone that's poor is separated from his neighbor, and if he's poor enough, maybe his neighbor wants to go out and do things. You know, they might be best friends, maybe pretty good friends, but his neighbor has more money and wants to go out and just do something for fun. And this other guy, can't hardly keep groceries in his house, and he ends up separated from him. Even if someone else is poor around him, he can't. Neither one of them have money to do anything. And so they're always just working to make ends meet and all this kind of stuff. And they end up separated from their neighbor. And that's just kind of the natural tendency of people. Okay. And when you are dealing with people whose chief value is wealth, like in America, the word America is two Spanish words, amor rica, literally lover of riches. So when you're measuring what's value based on wealth, the wealthy those with wealth have lots of friends, but they're friends like the prodigal son had, and the poor end up with no friends. Not a good situation. And Solomon addresses this some more in Proverbs 19 in verses 6 through 7. Many will treat the favor of the prince, and every man is a friend to him that gives gifts. All the bread of the poor do hate him. How much more his friends go far from him? He pursues them with words, yet they're wanting to him. Again, when people have this mindset, in America, we'll say things like Bill Gates is worth $200 million or 200, or whatever the case may be. I mean, see, there's an ideal there where certain the value of people based on how much wealth they've acquired. And this is the mindset we're looking at here. Well, people are going to treat the favor of the prince. Remember, a prince is a ruler, while the rich rule over the poor. So they're always going to be asking them for favors. And they're going to, and if they give gifts like Oprah does on her show, she's very, very, whatever else you may think of Oprah, that was very wise of her, because now she has no trouble packing her show with an audience, because they're going there hoping, at least partly, that there's something under the seat, some sort of gifts she's given to all of them, And so, they all want to be Oprah's friend, But really, what kind of friends are they? Remember, the prodigal son had friends too, as long as he had money. When we ran out of money, he also ran out of friends. And this is a problem with those who have wealth. They often are lonely, even when they have friends, because they don't know if they have any friends that are truly they're going to be their friends at all times. Remember, a true friend loves at all times, right? They don't know that. They don't know who's just their friends because trying to get favors from them, and because they give them gifts, and who their real friends are. But the poor have a problem too. The brother is poor to hate him. It means they hate being around him. Why? If he's entreating favors to them all the time, maybe they want to help him, but they can't. It just gets tiring. Or maybe they do help him, but because his root problem that's causing his poverty is not dealt with. Yeah, they give him a fish. They give him a fish today. He's still going to be hungry tomorrow. And his friends are going to go far from him. He pursues them with words. They're going to try to get away because they can't. Because he's draining on them. And maybe his need is real. This poor person's need is real. So they can also end up alone. So how do we solve this problem? Well, Solomon addresses that in Proverbs 22, verses 1 through 2. A good name is ready to be chosen in great riches. and loving favor than gold, silver, and gold. The poor and rich meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. Okay, remember, Mordecai chose a good name over great riches. When he saved the king's life, he told Esther, he told the king, he did nothing to try to get repaid. He waited on the Lord, on Yahweh, Yahuwah, however you want to say Yahweh. But we'll go with the Lord for right now. Can I go with English there? Because we are speaking in English. And the honor came later at God's timing. And remember, God's timing was 5 years later. But he had a good name that was written down. And he chose that rather than trying to pursue riches. Instead of right away saying, hey, king, I saved your life, maybe a little money, get me out of my poverty, But, he's a gatekeeper. Maybe, maybe move me up and give me, and then, but he chose to have a good name instead. And loving favor is better than silver and gold. Again, how many times we read someone had favor with a ruler, and the ruler took care of them the rest of their life. Even King Jehoiakim, who led Israel, whose actions brought about Israel being brought in Judah being caught into captivity, Jerusalem destroyed, the temple destroyed. But later, the king favored him and put him over all other kings. Put him over all other kings in his kingdom. The king. This is Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, did this. And he ate in the king's house the rest of his days. That was much better than the king giving him silver and gold and sending him off. So really, relationships are more important. This loving favor and good name are really about relationships, a reputation of relationships. That's more important than acquiring wealth. And because of that, the rich and the poor can meet together. And why? Because when they value people, not because of how much wealth they have acquired, but because the Lord is the maker of them all, it changes their perspective completely. The best way to help a poor person is to help them have the means to quit being poor. And it takes two to do this. The rich man may have the means, for the poor man has to humble himself as well. Humility before honor, remember? A rich man may want to help a poor person or several, and he might say, okay, I'm gonna make you a loan, a no interest loan, which is in line with God's word, the Torah, right? I'm gonna give you a loan, and you're gonna have to work for me until the loan's repaid. And part of that loan, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you the money to get training. You have to go to this training. I'm going to set you up with, say, a franchise, and eventually the loan's going to be paid off, and you're going to be, and then and that thing will be yours, kind of like Laban and Jacob, right? Because the rich man now is not, and the rich man's going to end up with friends. He's going to end up with real friends, because he's not valuing people based on their wealth. And he's doing things to be friendly. And if you show yourself friendly, you will have friends, the Bible tells us. And some of these people, of course, may be totally ingrates. It can happen, but some won't. And he's going to end up with a good name. And people are going to speak well of him. And, he's traded great riches for a good name. He's going to have loving favor in the community, because he chose that red and silver and gold. And the key of it all is recognizing their value. Everyone has intrinsic value. How valuable? They are so valuable. Each person is so valuable that the Father sent his own Son to die a horrific, horrible death that Passover reminds us of in a few days, because they were worth redeeming. And when you value people on that basis, you don't have this problem of rich and poor both ending with no real friends. So you don't want the acquiring of wealth to, again, cause you to start evaluating everyone based on their wealth. You want to evaluate them based on the fact they're made in the image of God instead. Now, in Proverbs 22, verse 16, Malach Shlomo, or King Solomon, if we prefer, has this warning for us. He that oppresses the poor and increases wealth, riches, and he that gives to the rich shall surely come to want. Okay, and you're trying to acquire wealth. There's two things you don't want to do here. One, you don't want to oppress the poor. Why? We already read about this. God will take your wealth away from you. He'll repay you for that. You don't want to be doing that. And you don't want to be giving to the rich. Remember those guys seeking the kings? People often bring presents to kings. When they come in their present, they can bring a present. They can bring a present, and sometimes, and that present may be very costly to them, but the king doesn't really need it often. Sometimes the king doesn't even see it. Sometimes it gets written in the gift registry or something that the king never reads. But he's given to the rich because he's looking at it as an investment. He's hoping that if I give the king this thing, which the king was the rich person already has more wealth and doesn't really need. If I give him this, maybe I can get trying to buy his favor. So if they can buy his favor, goodwill, we put it in business terms, buying goodwill, right? They're trying to buy goodwill from the rich. So the rich will give them favor in some business deal. But often the rich will just take their money, not give them the favor at all. And now they just have less wealth than they had before. And you keep doing that, you're gonna come to poverty. So that's not how you gain. These are not ways to acquire wealth. Now we continue on in Proverbs 22, in verse 22 through 23. Rob not the poor, because he is poor, and they oppress the afflicted the gate. For the Lord will please their cause and spoil the soul of those that spoiled them. And this is what I mentioned a minute ago. But they don't rob people who are poor just because they're poor. They like Naboth's vineyard, or Uriah the Hittite. The only thing he had of great value was his wife, and and Nathan, where he rebukes David, compares it to a poor man. The only thing he has of value is one sheep that this rich man takes away from him and kills and eats to feed his guest. They're robbing the poor because they're poor. Why? Because they don't believe the poor can do anything back to them. We've already read about the poor, about the poor's in a bad position and stuff because of poverty. And the afflicted in the gate. Let me explain who the afflicted are. That means not just the poor, but also the foreigner, like the illegal alien, perhaps an alien. In American terms, legal or illegal. Somewhat the fatherless. They have a father to defend them. I grew up like this, and I can tell you it's terrible. Okay, when other people have one, people will oppress you. There were at school events. Other people whose parents had fathers got off for those events. They were often on Friday, which was the busiest day of the restaurant I worked at. I never got them off. I didn't have a father. Their fathers would come up to and say, "Hey, if you don't give my son the day off, he's not going to work anymore." I was working to help take care of my mother and my brothers. and I was definitely oppressed because of that. Okay, I was being robbed, being oppressed because of the poor. So the poor are afflicted, the foreigner, and foreigners. My It's not afflicting migrant worker like foreigners to pay them a decent wage. There's a guy out here in Oklahoma at a pecan grove, and he hired he hired people from Mexico who may or may not, some may have had forged paperwork or whatever. They paid them $15 an hour, and the minimum wage at that time was like $6. Okay, but they had families and stuff. But I also had a field where I grew up. There was a guy who had beans, a bean field. And he was paying people below minimum wage who were either super poor or they were aliens, perhaps illegal aliens, because they were in a bad position and he was afflicting them. And another group that's because me, because I was fatherless, and them because they were foreigners. But another group is handicapped people. They may not be able to do some things, but they can do other things. The truth is, all of us have some things we can't do and other things we can. I'm I'm a software engineer, and I'm a really good one. But you know what? I'd be a really terrible singer or or a dancer. I lack any natural sense of rhythm. You know, you have the perfect voice for silent movies. Okay, I mean, but so the wise person looks at what I can do and hires me for that. The wise person looks at is looking to help these handicapped people and isn't saying worried about what they can't do, walk, see, whatever the case is, because this is affliction. You are afflicted. Blindness is not is affliction. Deafness puts you at a disadvantage in the world. But they're looking to accommodate and looking for what they can do. But don't if you oppress them in these groups, you're going to have a serious problem because the Lord is going to plead their cause. And he's going to spoil the souls of those that spoiled them. That guy with a bean field, with a large bean field, who was doing this, in the end, he lost his farm. He came to poverty. Maybe went to prison. I'm not sure if he did, but he did lose his farm. And the circumstances were people say, well, that was a strange set of circumstances. No, that was the Lord at work. Okay. He pled their cause and spoiled the soul of those that spoiled them. So again, we do not want to be acquiring wealth by doing these things. We want to love God. We want to love people because they're made in the image of God and always treat them fairly. That's the right way to acquire wealth, and the wrong way is to take advantage of them because they're poor or fatherless or orphans. I said foreigners or handicapped. And this is not just extends to rich people, as Solomon tells us here in Proverbs 28, verse 3. A poor man that oppresses the poor is like sweeping rain that leaves no food. I know everyone always complains, and casts it off like, well, the mean rich people are doing this, and that's why the poor are oppressed. No, there's plenty of poor who are oppressed by other poor people. And today, in our own modern times here in America, we have been seeing this. A bunch of people claim, oh, this other ethnic group's oppressing us. And they have a riot and they destroy the homes of people of their own ethnic group and their businesses. And the sweeping rains, like a rain that comes at harvest time, destroys your crop and there's nothing to eat. They destroyed their businesses of their own community. It was poor oppressing the poor. These riots and protests were just a cover to commit crimes against each other often, or against their neighbor. I shouldn't say that, each other. The people who weren't protesting who are trying to make a decent living, and I mean, they may have been out there, they may have been carrying a sign, and there may be, and sometimes there's some legitimate concerns. But the ones who were doing all this rioting and looting and stuff, they were just, they were just using it as a cover to oppress other poor people in their own neighborhood, and they destroyed their own community. So oppressing the poor and the afflicted is a sure way not to acquire wealth, but to come to poverty. We want to avoid that at all cost. That is not a wise way to acquire wealth. Now, we continue on in Proverbs 30, verse 7 through 9, where we read the following. Because now we're going to start getting into, well, what, where's the balance? What do we want? And that's what we're going to talk about here at the end. Two things I've required of you. Deny them not before I die. Remove far from me vanities and lies. Give me your poverty or riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. Lest I be full and deny you, saying, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and still and take the name of my God in vain. Okay? And this is what so what he's talking about here is having a balance in your life here, okay? You don't want to be super rich. You want to be, well, I go say middle class, say maybe upper middle class often. What you want is food convenient for you. You want what your needs are today taken care of. You don't want to be in poverty where you don't have what you need. You don't want to be you don't want riches where you have way too much more than you need. You have way so much more than you need. It starts causing you problems. These problems we've talked about. Because if you have way too much, you can deny him and say, who's the Lord? Which is what happened to Israel. The Lord showed Moses. Yahuwah, Yahweh, Yahweh, however you want to pronounce Yahweh. That's the letters of the name. Said, told Moses, hey, when Israel gets in the land and I bless them, and they become fat, start living large, they're going to forget about me and say, look what my own hands have done. It's exactly what they did. You don't want to acquire wealth that's going to cause you to deny the Lord. Because it never ends well for those who deny the Lord and say, who's the Lord? Like Pharaoh. I don't know the Lord. That's what he tells Moses. Who's the Lord that I should obey him? That will bring you eternal destruction. But if you're poor, it can cause you to steal, which is breaking one of the 10 Commandments, and even curse God, take his name in vain. Because I've lived through the crushing weight of poverty. And that's exactly what it is. It's crushing. I never took God's name in vain. It's out of the 10 Commandments. It's the one I never committed from my heart. At least, I never killed anyone, but that was only because I denied means and opportunity, for example. But I certainly lusted after people's, other women and blah, blah, blah. But I never took God's name in vain because I was terrified to do so. But I understand why crushing poverty could lead someone to do that. Because it's not their poverty is not from God oppressing, it's from other people. And they were like, why are you allowing this? Well, I gave man a free will, and why is he allowing you to sin? The same reason, right? So what we need is just what we need for each day. Give us this day our daily bread. That's what we want to live. Okay, trusting in the Lord to take care of us day by day, and He does, and thanking Him for it, and recognizing Him. Whatever wealth we've acquired, it came from Him. And because we don't want to be like start relying on that wealth itself, having our eyes not on the wealth giver, but on the wealth. Because that's greed. And this is what Solomon says about greed in Proverbs 30, verses 15 through 16. The horse leech has two daughters, give and give. Three things there are never satisfied, yea, four things that say not, it is enough. The grave and the barren womb, the earth is not filled with water, and the fire that says not, it is enough. Okay, a horse leech, well, it's a leech, and it's catching a horse and just starts sucking the blood. And and it just never, it'll just keep doing it to you till you get it to remove. Some leeches will, when they're full, they'll just drop off, but not the horse leech. Just give and give and give. It's Solomon's using a figure of speech of greed. Greed is never satisfied because greed is trying to solve a problem that with money that money cannot solve, like some of these we've talked about. Okay, and because of that, it's just like the grave. The grave being collectively never go, not a single grave like a person's, but the grave in collective is never going. That's it. Nobody else die. None have died. Out of the room. You know, you know, zero occupancy. No, the barren womb's never satisfied until the only way to satisfy is for it to quit being barren. It wants to produce children. The earth, even if it's under a lake, if it dries up, it's not like never give me more water. Because even if it's under a lake and that lake dries up like they do in severe drought, the earth isn't like, well, it's okay, I was full anyways, they'll need more. No, it's depending upon rain and whatever continuing. So it continues to have that lake there. Even if it's got a lake, water sitting on top. It's not filled with water to the point where it's like, don't know more. And fire, of course, never just quits burning because, well, I've burned enough, I'm done. No, it quits when it's out of fuel or oxygen or heat, huh? So but that's what greed's like. You're just never going to be satisfied trying to fill with money, trying to answer with money questions that cannot be answered with money. You need God and you need people. And wealth, if you acquire wealth in the wrong way, it'll remove both of those from your life. You're gonna be in this vicious cycle. And you can end up you can end up like this guy here. Solomon talks about in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. Ecclesiastes 6 verses 1 and 2. There's an evil I've seen under the sun, and it's common among men. A man to whom God gives riches and wealth and honor, so that he wants nothing for his soul of all he desires. Yet God gives him power not to eat thereof, but a stranger eats it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. Okay, now I want you to notice how this man, God gave him wealth, riches, and honor. But this man was only a means to an end for God. Remember, he'll give the wealth of the wicked ends up getting transferred to the righteous. Eating it, metaphorically enjoying it and getting the benefit of it. And there's been a case of people who built large homes. They had wealth. They built large homes. They never got to occupy. And these homes ended up becoming, housing orphans instead. And the ones who were benefiting from those homes were strangers. The guy didn't know the orphans. Perhaps he died with no one his will, and they decide, well, give it to them. He never even got to use the home. Kind of like that rich farmer who says, I'm going to build myself up barns. And God says to him, you fool, tonight your soul is required of you. Who's going to, he didn't get any benefit from that. Someone else did. So God only gave this guy wealth, honor, and riches as a means to accomplish God's own purposes. And that's gonna happen to you. That's what happens to people often when they acquire wealth by wicked means. They have they don't have the power to enjoy it. They don't have the means to enjoy it. One, they're spending all their time acquiring wealth and worry about someone taking their wealth and stuff. They can't. They don't have any time or energy or any. Their life is miserable, to tell the truth. And it ends up all benefiting someone else, not themselves. So we do not want wealth. We don't want wealth passing through our hands, but us being foreign and alien to a relationship with God. He may give it to us, but it's only so we are only to get it to somebody else. And then when he's done with us, we're thrown away. We're cast into hell, thrown into the lake of fire. We don't want to be. That's not a good scenario for acquiring wealth. We don't want to be like that. So Solomon is going to conclude this entire matter for us here in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, starting in verses 8 through 12. If you see the oppression of the poor and a violent perverting judgment just in the province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the high regards it, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. He that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loves abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they're increased that eat them. What good is there to the owners thereof, save in beholding them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, or eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. Okay, well, first of all, don't marvel, because as long as we're in this wicked world, there's going to be someone oppressing the poor, reverting judgment and justice in a province or a kingdom, a country. It happens here in the United States. It's not a country on earth where this doesn't happen. But also it means don't be perplexed by the matter or be in anxiety over it. Because God, he's the one that's higher than the highest. He's regarding it. He's higher than them. And we've already talked about how he take their wealth, give it to someone else, destroy, and ultimately, if you go on the pride and stuff, they'll be destroyed. So don't be surprised it's happening, and don't be in anxiety over it either. But the truth is, we all rely on God. He made the earth. All of us eat and everything, and he made all that we eat. The greatest king, even the richest one of all time to this point. Messiah will be richer in the range, but today, to this point in history, the richest was Solomon, the man who wrote this. They still had to eat food that came from the earth. He, like everyone else, relied on the earth to eat. And God's the maker of that. And if you love silver, you'll never be satisfied. If you love money, and if you love abundance, there's never enough increase for you. You'll be like a guy who takes an investment and say it comes back 100-fold, and he's like, gee, I wish I could do better. I mean, kind of like Michael Phelps' mom. So watching the Olympics, he went a second time. He set new world records that broke his old world records. He set a world record for breaking world records. And he's like, I'm done. I've had it. I'm tired. He did this cupping and all this stuff. And I saw his mom on the interview, and she's like, well, I think Michael can do a little better. I mean, he's got a little more in him. She wasn't satisfied with the increase. He saw these world records the first one, but he outdid himself on the second one, and she just wasn't happy with it. And that's what's going to happen to you if your love is for abundance. If you're valuing everyone else and yourself on your wealth, you're never going to be happy. And part of your problem is when your goods increase, So are they. When your business grows, so does the number of employees you have. And as the saying goes, you've created a monster, now you got to feed it. And you're so busy taking care of them, taking care of your business, take care of them, which more you take care of it, the more of them you get, that you don't even have time, and you end up like, I think it was President Trump. I heard of this guy who built at resorts he builds up, never had time to go to them. I mean, he'd been to some, but not all of them. Well, he had pictures. That's mine, you know. Maybe photos on his wall to show people or whatever, you know. Well, did you ever been to it? Well, no. I'll get to it someday. Kind of usually kind of answer those things, right? All I can say is, hey, that's mine over there. Now that guy working for him, let's go to the resort guy. Let's say he's a janitor or something like that, you know, custodian of some sort or whatever. You know, or well, at the end of the day, he goes home and goes to sleep, and his sleep is sweet. Exercise actually helps you sleep. I don't know if you knew this or not. But the rich man's at night not able to go to sleep, tossing and turning because he's worried about someone else taking his wealth and excess. In general, his life is miserable. And he can end up like Jay Gould, who was the richest man on earth once. And a reporter got an interview with him and asked him, "What's it feel like to be the richest man on earth?" And his answer started with this statement: "I do not suppose on earth there's a more miserable devil than I." If that's what wealth does to you, you don't want it. You don't want that kind of wealth. We want to acquire wealth wisely, wealth that's a blessing to us and not a curse. And we're going to look at now we're going to look at what causes it to be a curse often, besides getting it unjustly to begin with. What else? In Ecclesiastes 5:13-17, we read this: "There's a sore travail which I've seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. For those riches perish with trivial travail, and he begets a son, and there's nothing in his hand. As he came forth from his mother's womb, naked shall return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor where he may carry away in his hand. And this is a sore evil. In all points it came, so shall he go. And what profit is he that labored for the wind? All of his days he eats in darkness. He has much sorrow and wrath with his sickness." Okay, so here's what we'll go to the cause in a moment here, but here's what happens to this person. Well, we'll start at the cause. The problem is they have riches the owners kept to their own hurt. They had wealth they should have gave away to take care of other people. Remember, he that gives to the poor will never lack. But they didn't. You know, and of course, a great example of that is the rich young ruler. Now, Jesus didn't ask everyone to give up everything, but he might. He asked this guy. And the guy went away very sad. But it was to his own hurt. He threw away a relationship with God. He kept what he could not, to not lose what he could not keep. He lost what he would not, he lost something he did not gain something he could not lose. I'll just say that's a better way to say it. Again, to not lose something he could not keep anyways in the long run. He forfeited gaining something that he could not lose in the long run. It was entirely to his own hurt. So when the Lord's dealing with you, give up some of your wealth to someone else. Help someone, and you can't help everyone. if Sam Walton had lived 2 more years, he'd been the world's first trillionaire. But if he distributed his money and his will evenly to everyone on Earth at the end of his life, everyone on Earth would have got $137. If they were living on $2 a day in 3 months' time, it'd all been gone. And they'd be back where they were. God's not asking you to be God and to help everyone, but he is asking all of us to help someone. And when he's asking you and dealing with you, maybe even give away all your wealth, like the rich young ruler, or maybe give away a large amount of your wealth for some purpose, like the woman who washed the feet of Messiah. It was costly, 300 days' wages. So, or the tax collector who said, "I'm going to give half my money. I'm going to give half my money to the poor. I'm going to pay back everyone I stole from, and plus some, and I'm going to give, and what's left, we give half of that to the poor." Messiah wouldn't like give it all to the poor, but the salvation came to that house that day because he didn't keep what the Lord was telling him to give away. But what happened? But in this scenario, Solomon's talking about the guy did keep it. It was to his own hurt. Because what happened? The Lord wanted that wealth had been accumulating. Nothing wrong with accumulating wealth. And Joseph, that woman had to accumulate that 300 to buy that spikenard at 300 days' wages. She had to accumulate that money for a long time. But she wasn't accumulating it for herself. She never lost sight for the Lord's purposes. And that's why she accumulated. And when it came time to do it, she spent it. But this guy doesn't. And what happens? The Lord still wants his will to be done. He's going to take it out of that man's hand and put it somewhere and get it to where he wants anyways. And this man, he's now going to have nothing to give his son, an inheritance. And he came, and this implies, he came in this world naked. Perhaps he was a poor man. He worked his whole life for this. But in the end, he had nothing to even leave to someone else. He did all this work for nothing. He labored for the wind. And he ate in darkness and obscurity, perhaps often alone, like we was talking about. Ate lunch by himself, didn't have time to go out with other people except. And and worrying about his wealth and all this stuff made him sick and sorrow. And all this trouble came with it. We talked about what comes with, and it was all for nothing because he wouldn't give it away when the Lord was dealing with it. It's not always good to be rich, just like it's not always good to be the boss, like we talked about. We talk about wise business people. It's not always good to be the boss. It can come with trouble, lots of trouble. And that's what happened to this guy because he wasn't humble. He didn't have the humility before honor. So he didn't give it away when he should have. He kept it to his own hurt. Now, in Ecclesiastes 5:18-20, Solomon wraps this up for us. Verses 18-20. Behold, that which I've seen. It is good and comely to eat and drink, to enjoy the good of all his labor that he takes into the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him. What is his portion? Every man to whom God gives riches and wealth has given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answers him in the joys of his heart. Okay, so this is, in the end, all about work-life balance. And you cannot do it on your own. It's about trusting God in all things. Accumulating money when he tells you to accumulate it. Giving it away when he tells you to give it away. Trusting him, he's going to take care of you. And not shutting people out of your life. And not being afraid to spend any of it on having fun sometimes. Now, you don't want to be you want to discern the right time. Remember, the heart of the wise is in the funeral home. Spends his days wisely because he knows they're not endless. But the heart of the fool is in the house of mirth, is in the party house. But there is a time to celebrate. And like the prodigal son, when he came home, his father celebrated. His older brother didn't even want to join the celebration. Thought it was a waste of money. But hey, it's in to celebrate. And I do too. My son died from COVID. He wasn't just heart not beating, he was brain dead for 8 minutes. And I got this from the testimony of the attending physician. And God brought him back to life on September 30th, 3 years ago. So September 30th is now a holiday for us called Lazarus Day. If that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is. So you want that balance. You don't want to be working all the time, so you don't have time for people, don't have any time to enjoy what you do have. And remember, the root of that comes from not trusting the Lord, leaning on your own understanding. You want to work hard when it's work time. When it's not work time, you stop. And you trust God to give you promotion and wealth. That's the way to acquire it. And if you'll do this and learn to do it, you're not going to have a bunch of bad days because, as the saying goes, time flies when you're having fun. I mean, it's like just like on your body. If you did something, and let's say you went and you like a massage, and you get a massage. Maybe you get several of them. Maybe you get 100 of them. You tend not to remember every massage. But let's say you're out somewhere one day, there's a terrible accident, leaves a terrible scar on your arm. Your arm gets cut open from near your thumb all the way down to near your elbow, right? And left this horrendous scar. You'll remember that. Because you'll remember that and you'll see that scar, and that scar will remind you of it. But you're not going to remember those massages because so you want to keep away from get yourself hurt unnecessarily in acquiring wealth. You want to enjoy wealth. And the bottom line is this: you want God to be your master and wealth to be your slave. That's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.